Okay, thank you for joining. So today we've come to our third session where we're going to analyze the techniques to investigate and document existing systems. So in our previous tutorial, we've looked into system development life cycle. We looked into the type of methodology that are available and how companies implement them on the day-to-day activities. Then we looked into project management and the roles of project manager, the structure, and what developers do. So today, for today's session, we're going to look into existing systems. So something that is already available into production and how these can be analyzed and how they can now improve these systems. So we will cover three major learning outcomes. And let me just get our presentation for today. One sec. Okay, so as we know, when dealing with information system, it is essential to have like clear understanding of the system current state. So what does this mean? That this understanding will now help us to identify strength, weakness, and area for improvement. So we'll now cover some of the point from our indicative content, where we look into obviously the strength, weaknesses, and we'll look at what they are in details. So here we have some tips on how to analyze the situation. So we need to interview and questionnaire. So we have to be able to be conducting interviews within the system users, stakeholders, and subject matters expected to help us in gathering insight into the system requirement. And questionnaires also can facilitate gathering feedback from larger audience, and also allow us to capture more useful data to improve our usage and functionality. So also we have to be able to be documenting our reviews. So by reviewing this existing system documentation, this will now allow us to draw and identify what are the new requirement specification, and also what are the design document and the user manuals. And also we have to look into the observation, where with observing system, users can now process in action and provides first-hand insights into how the system is used in real world. Surveys are very important as well. So by distributing survey to system users and stakeholders, this will now enable gathering quantitative data on system usage, satisfaction, and performance. Data analysis. So with analyzing the system data, logs, and performance metrics, this will now provide insight into the system usage patterns, trends, and anomalies. Then it is important also to look into context diagram. So this can now provide a high-level view of our system. They can now show system boundaries, external entities, and interact with the system and major information flow. This also allows our stakeholders to understand how the system fit in larger environment. And this can be done creating prototypes. So by creating prototypes or mock-ups of a system interface, and functionalities help us in visualizing and validating proposed changes or enhancement. Also, it is important to have functional decomposition. So what do we mean by functional decomposition? We're now going to break down the system into smaller, manageable function or processes. This can now help us to understand the system structure and identify all components and the relationship. Also, when it comes to analyzing existing systems, we need to be able to draw data flow diagrams. This allows us to visualize how data moves through our system. You now illustrate our input, process, storage, or any other data. And it is really important because it helps us also identify our data sources, our data destinations, storage or processing steps. Also, it is important to conducting a SWOT, which is strength, weakness, opportunities, threat analysis, which help us in assessing the current state of our system and identify the internal strength and weakness, as well as external opportunities and threats. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with SWOT analysis, but this is a really important step when it comes to feasibility studies as well, when we have to now look into all these components in order for us to visually see what our strength and weakness is. Here we have nice diagram where we're going to look into carry out an analysis using information gathering techniques to review an existing system. So as we mentioned before, when we're now gathering the information, we have to be able to interview, question, and observe. So we'll now have to look into our advantages and disadvantages. So this will now outline the information gathering technique used to review our existing system, where we'll now look into our advantages and disadvantages. So before implementing the changes, we will now see if we're going to benefit or not from them. Then we have to be able to document the result, and we have to be able to also gather some feedback, collect some feedback from survey. So here are some tools that can be used for collecting this data. So we have data flow diagrams, as I mentioned before. These are really useful because they allow us to visualize how the data moves through the system. He also illustrate the input, process, storage, and output of our data. Also help us identify our data sources. ERD diagrams, which are very much more common, allow us to see what are the entities and the attributes and what is the relationship between them. So ERD diagrams are very used, and they really break down our database. So when it comes to database management system, DBMS, they use ERD diagrams to break down into smaller section and understand what are the correlation between these entities. So for instance, when we look at companies like Amazon, when you come to build your database, we now have to look into the correlation between our primary keys, secondary keys, and so on. We have flowchart, where these are going to represent the process of a workflow, and they're going to describe them step by step, also looking into the decision point and the outcomes. Then we have unified model language, UML, which is a standardized modeling language for representing system architecture, component, interaction, data behavior, and various diagram type. Also, we have wireframing. What do we use wireframing for? This allows us visual representation of user interface design and navigation flow. This is going to describe in the screen layout, content element, and user interaction. Okay, so now we're going to produce a feasibility report. So when it comes to understanding how doable our changes are going to be, we need to conduct our feasibility studies, and we now need to report them. So first of all, we need to identify the problem and the scope. So the scope of the problem will now include difficulties in tracking inventories levels, delays in fulfilling customer orders, and inaccuracy in inventory records. So looking back, I was an example of Amazon. This could be really good steps, a good problem that can be presented when it comes to looking into our feasibility report, and we can now understand what is going wrong with our system. So we now have to look into also the rationale behind of adoption of the new system, which is going to include increased efficiency, improved accuracy, enhanced customer service, and cost saving. So also we need to look at the constraint. So we have to look into budgetary constraint, time constraint, technical constraint, and regulatory constraints. So with the budgetary one, we have to look into our financial limitations. With time constraint, we will have to look into our deadline, and if we able to reach our target by the estimated deadline. Technical constraint, where we're going to look into existing infrastructure limitation or compatibility issues. And regulatory constraint, we now have to look into our compliance with the industry regulation and data protection law, which must be ensured to avoid any sort of legal issue. Also, it is important to look into the risks. So the risks which have been identified that could impact our feasibility. Success can be implementation risk, operational risk, security risk, and the vendor risk. So when it comes to implementation, we could have delays or difficulties in the system implementation, or maybe integration or user adoption might occur. Operational risk, which are going to look into operational disruption, system downtime, or performance issues, which might now affect our productivity. Security risk, where you now look into our data breaches, where we're gonna have unauthorized access from cyber attacks. Data losses, which might occur in proper security measures, which are not implemented. And lastly, we have our vendor risks, which are now depending on our third parties vendors, which they now have their own system, and this might cause some fault that will now affect our system. So it is really important to know the risks that are involved when it comes to dealing with third parties and how reliable our stakeholders are. So in conclusion, the proposed inventory management system will now offer significant benefit in addressing the current challenges faced by XYZ company. So this is simply an example of what our assignment brief is going to ask. So the assignment will now ask us to report all these steps that we covered today, such as identifying the existing issues with our system. You will now ask us to report feasibility studies, how to document them, and lastly is going to ask all the constraints and how to implement a new system, how to implement changes to our existing system. So this was everything for today's session. Is there any question?
No, that's great. Thank you, Victor. Yeah, it's all wow, to me it seems it's very straightforward. It sort of fits in with my work, as you know. So
okay.
Yeah, so sort of stuff
this is you're already familiar to all of
this.
this.
Familiar, exactly.
Okay, so if there are no any questions, I'm going to end this session and I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Have a good day, Victor.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.